Alrighty, I believe we are at 2 p.m. EST, which means it's time for my panel. Welcome everyone to A Realm Reshelled. My name is Innis, and I will be talking about the molluscan side of fishing in Final Fantasy XIV and why I think it's important. First of all, thanks to everyone who's come here as a live audience. I know it's been a little bit of congestion with the service and everything, and I'm so glad so many of you have made the trip. Now, before I get started, I just want to say big spoiler warning for locations in Endwalker, as well as Shadowbringers. I'm not going to be mentioning story points in any way, but just to be sure that everyone is aware. And I think I'll just get started right on my presentation. So, first things first, why on earth am I here talking about mollusks today? Well, first of all, I absolutely love mollusks. I love snails, I love clams, any kind of mollusk, I will love it, I can guarantee it. And that's why I thought talking about mollusks in Final Fantasy XIV, especially when it comes to fishing, was the perfect theme for my presentation. On screen right now, you can see pictures of some of my wonderful snabies, or snail babies. And one of the best snail memes in the universe, if you ask me. So, to begin with, I do have to cover some theory, so just bear with me here. We'll be looking a little bit on what defines a mollusk, and I hope that's going to help you a little bit understand what I'm going to be talking about. So I have two definitions here. I'm not going to read them in full, but a mollusk is very often, we're talking about a boneless animal who has a shell of some description or has a mantle of some description. And that gives us something to work on when looking at mollusks. But in Final Fantasy XIV, it's not exactly a single definition what a mollusk is, and it's not easy to see or understand what a mollusk is. Some examples here I have the fan clam, the wormhole worm from Ultima Thule, and the shipworm. All of these have mollusk in the description, but if you look at these pictures, I think only the first one would really tell you immediately that we're talking about a clam. You can see these behind me as well on the wall. You have the fan clam bottom left and the shipworm right above my head on the top, and the wormhole worm right next to it. I was very surprised when I discovered that the wormhole worm, was a mollusk, but apparently it is, and I'm gonna accept that as fact. And another issue when talking about mollusks in Final Fantasy XIV is how, like, the language they use, speaking about mollusks. There's no one term that is used here. There's snail, slug, mollusk with a K or a C. There's wavekin, shelled wavekin, soft-shelled bivalve, clam, etc. And oftentimes, I simply have to look at the image or look at the description to understand whether or not it's actually a mollusk or not. Luckily for us, we can refer back to the real world. For example, here we have the armor and the sea butterfly, which do have real-life equivalents in the iron snail and sea butterfly respectively, which are, by the way, absolutely beautiful mollusks, especially the iron snail and how it's covered in metal scales on the body. If you have time afterwards, I highly recommend you read into it or see a video about it. It's truly fascinating to have a mollusk on the bottom of the ocean using iron to make its body and shell. It's tremendous. Now, I'm going to move on to one of the main segments of my presentation, and I highly recommend you go back to LunarCon and watch the presentation on how the Calamity affected the trout population, because we'll be talking about something very similar here. As we all know, the Calamity was a very devastating event for Eorzea, and it affected many different biomes, different parts of the continent, and of course the animal populations across the continent were severely affected. And one very good example here is the ogre horn snail that can be fished in Querthus Western Highlands. It says in the fish guide that it was unable to survive in cold temperatures. The only ogre snails left in Querthus are those which live in the warm waters of thermal springs. So what does this tell us? This says to us that, okay, maybe at some point there was cold here. Sorry, there was warmth here. And thus, if we look back at 1.0, we see that Querthus was actually much, much warmer. And this is taken from the Eorzean encyclopedia, saying that the great snows which came to the highlands of Querthus in the wake of the Calamity led to the extinction of countless plants and animals. Before then, the fertile banks of the two rivers which flow through the western highlands were once teeming with life. And it's very interesting, at least to me, that these snails used to be most likely all over the region, but now they've sort of huddled together in the hot springs, which you can find across Coerthus. Another snail, I don't have it on the slide here, but I believe, maybe you can chime in here, Fruity. There's a clam with giant jaws that you can fish in Coerthus, which actually conceals the cold water inside its shell to create a thermal environment in which it can live. So it has actually found a way to adapt. Now, something else that I find very interesting that the snails of Eorzea can tell us about the star is how the environment has changed. And for this, I've used the Cindersmith and Armorer as examples. Some of you may already know you can fish the Cindersmith in Halo in the Duranian Fallouts, and it lives beneath the earth in the magma, which is a bit odd. Why can we fish a snail in lava? And the fish guide says that the metallic scales covering the lava-dwelling snails closely resemble those of the deep-sea snail known as the armorer, which you can see on the right, leading naturalists to hypothesize that at one time sea levels were much higher, and that when the water receded, snails left atop the mountain began evolving separately. Now, this, of course, didn't happen with the Calamity. There's way too little time for such a drastic evolution to take place. But if we look at the armorer and the real-life equivalent of the iron snail, we see something very interesting. That these snails most likely were predispositioned to this kind of evolution. Now, this is taken from Wikipedia, but it says that the iron snail is a species of deep-sea hydrothermal vent snail and is known only from deep-sea hydrothermal vents in the Indian Oceans, which hydrothermal vents means like volcanic gas coming through from beneath the earth, meaning that most likely they had already been exposed to this kind of environment, and therefore it was much easier for them to evolve in this manner to the Cindersmith that we know today. And it also points to how in Lanosia, I believe it's the Western Lanosia, oh, it says right there. But yes, that there is hydrothermal vents in Lanosia as well. Something else that the snails can tell us, or in this case, the mollusks. Now, I would like to point your attention to the canvases and the tank on the right behind me. That would be my left. You can see something in a tank and two things on the canvases. The first I'll be talking about here is the lunar deathworm, which you can fish in the chlorospond in Mare Lamentorum. The fish guide says that this is a menace of a mollusk with a mouth that is not the least bit inviting. And my first thought when I found this snail mollusk the first time was, how in the heck is this a mollusk? But for the sake of this panel, I'll go with it, and I'll show you why. It says further that one theory posits that one or more of these eons-old creatures was cast down to Idyllshire by a chance encounter with a comet, and there spawned such wonders as the sand-dwelling Olgoi-Khorkoi. Maybe some of you have already heard about this fish. It's one of the big fish slash rare fish you can fish in Final Fantasy. Oh, pardon me. My computer did something funny here. Right. So, okay, let's have a look at the Olgoi-Khorkoi, which you can fish in the Saguli Dunes. Here it says that of those who claim to have seen the king Olgoi-Khorkoi swimming through the endless desert sands, nearly all are known for their love of the red. And based on the lunar deathworm description, it is very likely that the Olgoi-Khorkoi is also a mollusk. But you may already have realized this, there's something else in the tank behind me, which is not a lunar deathworm or the Olgoi-Khorkoi. It is, in fact, the Shrieker, which you can fish in Hell's Lid. It says in the fish guide that anyone who has seen far enough into the maw of a Shrieker to confirm whether its rows of teeth line not just one, but two pharyngeal jaws could not have lived to tell the tale, so the anatomy of this cryptid remains shrouded in mystery. And in the next entry here, it says that despite its existence being little more than a rumor, 9 out of 10 sailors swear, like sailors on their grandmother's graves, that the fabled Shrieker is nearly identical in appearance to the almost as fables Olgoi-Khorkoi. Can we then posit from this that all of these three fish are actually mollusks? The only issue here is that a Shrieker mentions the pharyngeal jaws, which I will not go into specifics, but this is a trait that mollusks do not have. So I will leave a question mark there and move on. Something else very interesting that happens in the real world as much as it does in Eorzea is the invasive species being introduced to environments in which they do not belong. And snails are not immune to this either. For this, I will use the acorn snail, which you can fish in multiple locations in La Noscia and the Shroud, I believe. And it says in the fish guide that this snail is believed to have hitched a ride on the hull of a trade ship. The acorn snail is an invasive species originally from the New World, far to the west. As it has few natural predators in Eorzea, its numbers have exploded in recent years. This points to a big issue, which we also have in the real world. And for this, I'll use the zebra mussel, which is an invasive species in the US. And it says here, I used a usgs.gov site here, that the zebra mussels probably arrived in the Great Lakes in the 1980s via ballast waters that was discharged by large ships from Europe. They have spread rapidly through the Great Lakes region and into the large rivers. What this means for Eorzea is that most likely they have brought a lot of snails into the realm through what's called the ballast tanks on a ship, which led them to just spread like wildfire, because most likely these acorn snails do not have a lot of natural predators. And I hope you are following along so far. If you have questions along the way, you can put them in the chat and I will go through them at the end of the panel. And I will remain here on site after my panel as well if you would like to ask some questions or you just want to have a chat. Now, let's move on to a more practical side of things and how the realm has found a use for our soft-bodied friends. And obviously, one of the most well-known examples here is Charlene, where I've taken an excerpt from the encyclopedia. And it says that when Thaliak poured waters of knowledge into his river, the spiral shell became their keeper. Such is the legend wherein the Nautilus came to symbolize wisdom. Men have believed that mollusks live forever, from time immemorial. It is to capture this essence of these meanings that Charlene's flag bears a green spiral shell emblazoned upon a field of silver. And I must say, personally, it is a beautiful flag. And when I saw it the first time, as you can probably expect, I was overjoyed. And the Nautilus is, of course, something you can fish as well if you would like one for yourself on the Isle of Umber, South Shore, and Suspa spawning grounds. You can also see this emblem in Idyllshire, since it is the Chilean colony which was abandoned many years ago. Now, this is a bit of a fun bit for me. Have you ever wondered why your link shell has not responded to any of your messages? Left you on red, perhaps? No messages back? Well, it could in fact be that there is a counterfeit link pearl at play. And here we have the ink shell from Middle Thaliak River in the Durranian hinterlands to thank. As it says in the fish guide, the ink sacs of this bivalve mollusks has long been favored for the vibrant colors of the print they produce. Other parts of the wavekin have been used for less scrupulous purposes. The pearls in particular are sold as counterfeit link pearls, and many have been left mumbling into an inert mineral, wondering why their allies have abandoned them. So worry not if you do not get a response from your link shell. It could be that you've been sold a counterfeit link pearl. I would also like to mention that many a escargot, clam, oyster, etc. is used for cooking. And here we have some examples from the Eorzean cuisine. We have the ruffled oyster used for the raw oyster dish, coerthan oyster used for oyster confit, and sweet flesh oyster, which is used for the oyster on the half shell. And I find it very interesting that the coerthan oyster is also referred to as the Fury's shield in Ishgard. One more example that I would like to bring up here for its uses in the realm is how even back in the Allegan Empire, they knew to employ the use of snails. Now, the Allegan snail now is not fishable, but just bear with me, it used to be. It says here in the tooltip of the Allegan snail, which you can now gather as a botanist, that a giant snail believed to have been bred for consumption during the reign of the Great Allegan Empire. And this is level 2 gather, and I do wonder just how big these snails are. Now, this is from a old edition of Gamer Escape, where it says mostly the same thing. But if you notice down here, you used to be able to fish this in the North Shroud and Central Shroud using water bait. Now, I did not play in 1.0, so I don't know exactly what this means. But I do know that it's still in use today in tree toad and lava toad legs dishes. Now, I know this must have been a very heavy presentation so far, so I would like to go through a couple of sightseeing spots where you can either meet these great mollusks of our realm or see remnants of their existence. And this picture here is taken from the Ruby Sea, where you can fight against, I believe its name is the Unemi, I believe. It's a fate, reward fate. You get a orchestrion roll from this. The first spot I would like to draw your attention to is in Idyllshire. It is right below the hard place where you usually hand in your collectibles to Slowy Aliapo, and it's called the Snail. And it's a beautiful fountain with a beautiful view. I highly recommend you pay it a visit. Next is in Westerland Ossia, the Sapsa spawning grounds. It is one of the most heavily littered places with molluscan imagery. There's shells, there's clams, all kinds of things, and it's also where you can fish the Nautilus. from the Charlayan emblem. I personally recommend you visit this place at night, where these red shells that are on the rock formations here are very, very beautiful. Next, if you're in for some battle content, you can go to Hullbreaker Isle hard mode, and you can fight against the great shelled wavekin Emir. And she has some wonderful lightning aspected and ice aspected attacks. And I just sometimes go here to take pictures, to be honest. I think it's a very beautiful, beautiful creature. And of course, if you want to go to the deep sea, you can go to the Tempest and go to the, is it called Purpuree, I believe? It's one of those hidden fishing spots that you can't really get to without flying. But there is large clams and large spiral shells all around to have a look at. Lastly, this is one I'm not going to even try to pronounce, but it is in Thavner, right below the platform where Davadeepa spawns. It is full of these beautiful, vibrant shells. So, this was I would almost call it like a rapid round of mollusk facts, information, and lore. So now is the time to ask any questions if you have them. I can't see there being any questions, so I will continue. As you might have already heard during FishFest, Expedition Mollusk has been going on for 50 days. Today is the last day, and I have already submitted the last entry to the journal in the room. And I highly recommend you go and read it. You read it from back to front, entry 50 to 1. And if you want to learn more about the mollusks of our realm, there is further reading and listening if you're interested. This will also be left in the description of the VOD of this video. I highly recommend you listen to the Remnants of the Realm series from Speakers Network, especially the episode on Camp Dragonhead, which will tell you more about how Coerthas used to be before the Calamity. In this Encyclopedia Eorzea Volume 1, you can read about Coerthas as well. And I see there are some questions. I will get to that in just a moment. I am currently working on the last letter from the Expedition Mollusk, and it will be posted on the official archive of our own site. And lastly, conchology.eorzea.tumblr.com is going to be the follow-up field journal. So if you want to follow what I'm doing after this panel, after the Expedition Mollusk room and exhibit, then that's the place to go. So I see we have some questions from chat, and I will go through them now. We have a question from Val asking, do snails bite? They do indeed. Snails can bite. They have something called a radula in their mouth region, which is a tongue-like organ full of teeth. And the way they eat is they will rasp at things, meaning they can technically bite you. Next, we have, what is your favorite mollusk? Oh, that is a difficult question. I love a lot of mollusks, as you probably gather from my panel and everything else I've been doing on this character. But I'm gonna have to say the simple land snail is one of my favorites, as well as the leopard slug and the pancake slug. Val asks, can they kill me? Given time, maybe, but I don't have a definitive answer. What got you interested in mollusks? Asked Fox. It actually began when I was very young, and I would collect snails in little plastic boxes with holes in them so I could watch them. Of course, this drove my parents nuts, but from then on, really, I was incredibly interested in everything that had to do with mollusks, with snails. I just find them incredibly fascinating. The way they the way they view the world is very unique and very different from how we view it, obviously. With your mollusk research, does it seem like the devs consulted with someone while they were working on adding these guys? Asks BioRoxus. I definitely think so. Based on the depth and accuracy in which they reference back to real life mollusks, I definitely think they have consulted someone, or there is someone on the dev team that is incredibly interested in mollusks and they just haven't revealed themselves. Hiss asks, if a shrimp refuses to share food with another, is it a shellfish act? Yes. Carol asks, are there any mollusks in-game that look similar to a mollusk you have personally? The most similar version, I would say, is the elegant snail, because it looks most accurate to the real life land snail or garden snail, the Helix aspersa, perhaps. Unfortunately, it is only gathered by botanist, so I can't put it in a canvas, but maybe one day we'll see terrestrial mollusks making a comeback. What was your favorite part of planning it for Expedition Mollusks? Asks Sven. I think for me, it was simply making the character of Innis'a Bvalvah and making a person wholly dedicated to the field of conchology, which just means the study of gastropods and slugs and so forth. But I also really enjoyed simply fishing everything. Ahead of this panel, I have fished all 50 species of mollusk from A Realm Reborn and up until Heavensward. And it was just nice to go through them all and fish them again, if I'm honest. Did you already mention your snail's name? Asks Fox. If you mean the pictures I had in the beginning, I do not believe I did, but their names, respectively, from left to right, was Curiosity, Todd, and Cooper. What is the most unique / rare mollusk you have observed in person? Asks Hiss. I think it was the time I came across a very tiny snail with a elongated shell, and it has little teeth in the opening of the shell. And that was the first time I ever saw that snail in person. And turns out it is not as common where I live. So I think that's the most rare I've ever seen. But I'm hoping to maybe see like the silver slug one day, which is an invasive species technically, that's come from Europe. But otherwise, I see very common types of snails. Are there any more questions? I will, of course, stick around a little bit if you want to talk to me, ask some questions. Oh, Pun asks. Oh, Pun, sorry. From Hiss. Have you seen snails big enough to give someone a concussion? Ha ha. Very funny. But yes, I have. There are giant whelks in the deep ocean, I believe, that are. I think they can be like the shell can be the length of a person, which could easily take out a grown man. Are slugs just homeless snails? Asks Skylar. No. Many slugs do, in fact, have an internal shell or a calcium plate under the mantle that is used to protect them, their organs. So actually, they have abandoned their shells in trading it for mobility and squeezing into small places, and they can use the surroundings as protection instead. So actually, they're not homeless, they are just evolved beyond the need of a shell. there's not any more questions, I think this is a good place to wrap up for today. And I hope you take the time to visit some of the vistas I mentioned in my panel. And I just would like to say thank you for your time. And everyone who came out here to see me live today, I'm really, really thankful. And I'm really thankful for this opportunity.